Alright, so forgive the bedtime talk, but I already got cozy in bed. I forgot to record a video, and I don't want to wait till tomorrow, so let's just fucking do this. Alright, so there's not a lot that I want to say about Leviticus 8, 9, and 10. So we saw, the prescriptions handed down about the different types of offerings, sin offerings, peace offerings, etc. in the first chunk of Leviticus. And now it turns to some prescriptions that are commanded upon or demanded upon the Aaronic priests. And I've mentioned this before, but I think one of the things that's interesting is that we need not to simply see what's going on here as being a simple top-down type of power imposition, but that there are high stakes for the Aaronic priesthood as well. If they do anything wrong, they get killed. A couple of Aaron's sons, as a matter of fact, in this section, get killed because of their improper sacrifices. And so I think that's important to understand, that there's a very high standard, there's a high level of accountability, and therefore a high level of responsibility that the priesthood themselves are to be held up to. But I also don't want to absolve some sort of potential elements. I keep using this phrase about legitimation. I don't want to absolve the Aaronic priesthood from what seems to be clearly a perpetual reiteration of them legitimizing their position at the top of the ethical, social, religious, political hierarchy. One of the ways that I think we see this is that it's kind of cheesy maybe, but the to whom much is given, much is required kind of thing. And I think that, not to say that they're like the Spider-Man sort of thing of Israel, of ancient Israel, but they've kind of got the weight of that yoke, of that mantle that they must kind of carry forth as the leaders at the top of the social hierarchy. And I think you see that being reiterated here by, once again, the Aaronic priesthood kind of being given types of blessings. They're consecrated, as the scripture says, which flows from God to Moses, and then to Aaron, and then to Aaron's sons. And this consecration is something that's supposed to last throughout the generations, right? It's supposed to last forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and shit like that. So this is something that is establishing a narrative, a perpetual narrative that establishes the way things are, a hierarchy, an ontological hierarchy, which means something pertaining to being. It's not just purely a functional hierarchy. A functional hierarchy is like a doctor has a certain set of skills. So in a room when there's an emergency that requires a doctor, or let's say that requires a particular set of skills, that doctor has a particular hierarchy in that room. However, if there was something that was needed in a particular room and that doctor's skills weren't required, then functionally that doctor doesn't necessarily have a hierarchical position, right? So that's a functional type of hierarchy. An ontological hierarchy usually goes down to the essence of something, right? Like X type of person is simply more valuable socially because of cultural preference, or in this instance because of a type of metaphysical chain of being or hierarchy of being that establishes the Aaronic priests as being at the top of that societal pyramid, right? So there is an element of that we see here in this consecration that is solidifying, that is metaphysically grounding the hierarchical status, the dominant hierarchical status of the Aaronic priests in the ancient Israel socio-political world. And then I think something that's really important also to this is that for the Israelites, for the non-priests, what this does is this establishes a type of narrative where they can participate, which is every time that they are engaging in the sacrificial system that we saw laid out in Leviticus 1 through 7, that simultaneously there's a responsibility that's being placed on the Aaronic priests, as we're seeing in their consecration here in chapters 8, 9, and 10, which means that there's kind of a meeting in the middle, this top-down and bottom-up type of thing, that one establishes the metaphysical ontological hierarchy, and then that two also establishes a type of pattern, like a social and cultural pattern, whereby the Israelites themselves are going to be reaffirming that ontological hierarchy. With every sacrifice that they give, with every obedient, and then let's say even with every disobedient activity that requires a punishment that is carried out in the nation of Israel, there's a reaffirmation, a type of almost recreation, let's say, of the entire validity of the legal system. And so as the Aaronic priests are being consecrated and set apart here, I think sometimes I'm getting my cynical hat on as I'm reading this, and I'm like, oh, you can just see that this is established for maybe like improper power purposes, but I think we need to see that it's quite a bit more complex than that. I do think that there are elements of political legitimation that are going on, but at the same time, there are some real cultural, authentic cultural concerns that are being carried out here for how to like maintain this, how to maintain this complex community that is going to be divided up into different castes, classes. So I guess I'm trying to fight against my own cynicism here, which is, a definite tendency for people who've moved out of the church, especially when you start reading critical theology, critical biblical studies, critical philosophy. It can kind of make one a little jaded or overly, not to be redundant, but overly critical of the text. And I don't want to simply indulge in that. So I'm kind of trying to fight through that, especially as I'm working through the law, which is just something that I'm dispositionally inclined against as a technology that is supposedly sufficient and handed down by God, because I tend to see it as a human construct that is used for, biopolitical purposes in a Foucauldian sense, or for management or control purposes, or for despotic purposes, all kinds of different reasons. But nevertheless, it is a technology that is used by humans for very particular cultural reasons, immanent reasons. And so it's hard for me to see the transcendence or the value beyond those socio-political purposes that law tends to be used for. So, but again, I think this is part of doing a post-evangelical read of the Bible, is that I'm going to be dealing with my own inconsistencies and paradoxes and discomforts and things like that. So, yeah, anyway, that's kind of what's going on here in these sections, what my mind is thinking about as I'm reading through these chapters. I'll do another chunk tomorrow, and I won't be shirtless in bed, so no more thirst traps. But if you want to see more thirst traps and more of my nipple and semi-hairy chest, like, subscribe, comment, all kinds of shit like that. And I will be making more videos in the coming days as I'm trying to bust through the Torah as soon as possible, and so we can move on to some of the other stuff, because it will be a little bit repetitive, but just bear with me, okay? All right, later.